Do you ever feel a bit annoyed that people around the world aren't really allowed to see the real China?
I mean, of course, but honestly and sort of ironically, I feel I'm a bit used to that.
Hello, 大家好，欢迎回到外媒看中国，我是安博然。Everyone knows American media personality Tucker Carlson interviewed Russian President Vladimir Putin last week. It was, of course, one of the most watched interviews many can remember. But now Tucker is sharing videos where he's absolutely gobsmacked by the infrastructure in Moscow and wants to know why the United States is so run down. And it begs the question, imagine how he'd react if he came to Shanghai, for example. Today we'll discuss, and we'll also catch up with friend of the show, Eric Zhong, to get his take. This is Reports on China. I'm Andy Boreham in Shanghai. Let's get reporting. China's Spring Festival holiday, the biggest and most important of the year, is slowly winding down this weekend as everyone heads back home for work. Wherever you are in the world, happy Year of the Dragon. But before we get into today's topic, I just want to share a preview of an upcoming project I've been working on, which will go live on February 28. Let's take a look. Exactly 52 years ago today, then President of the United States of America, Richard Nixon, stayed in this very room at Shanghai's prestigious Jinjiang Hotel. Now, on the morning of February 28, 1972, Nixon and his team, including his wife Pat and his assistant Dr. Henry Kissinger, left this hotel to head home, having completed what the president would describe as the week that changed the world. And that it did, for it was from this hotel that China and the United States jointly issued the Shanghai Communique, a groundbreaking diplomatic document that heralded the beginning of the long road toward official relations between the two nations. I'm Andy Boreham in the seldom seen presidential suite at Shanghai's Jinjiang Hotel, and this is a special edition of Reports on China. Like I mentioned earlier, that video will go live on February 28, the 52nd anniversary of the release of the Shanghai Communique. Mark your calendars. Now, speaking of the Spring Festival, you may have heard the term the world's largest human migration. That's what happens in China every year during the Spring Festival, as hundreds of millions of people head back home to where they grew up to spend a week with family and friends. It's referred to in Mandarin as Chunyun. Well, today that holiday is coming to an end, and hundreds of millions are now heading back to the cities they live in for work. In fact, just yesterday alone, 622,000 people returned to Shanghai using the high-speed rail network. That's double the population of my home city. The fact is clear. China in 2024 has such amazing infrastructure that no person who visits here could or would ever say otherwise. Take a look at this often cited image spread online, showing just how much China's high-speed rail network has grown between 2008 and 2020. And that was 4 years ago. But the sad reality is that most Westerners in the world are completely and utterly unaware of this country's stunning infrastructure. Now, why is that? Well, because Western governments and media don't want them to know. And as infrastructure in the West falls into a neglected state of disarray, why would they? Especially when it comes to the United States, public transportation is in a hideous state. So hideous, in fact, that ordinary people simply don't use it if they have other options. The subway system in America's greatest city, New York, for example, is covered in graffiti, trash, and feces. People are frequently randomly pushed onto the tracks in front of oncoming trains by drug addicts and other miscreants. And that is not an exaggeration. And that is why the Western oligarchs in the media and government won't let the public see how good it is in China, because it would lead them to realize that the collective West's glory days are in the past. The people have it better in other parts of the world, and that is just a simple fact. Tucker Carlson found that out spectacularly last week when he took a look at one of Moscow's subway stations. He couldn't believe his eyes. Let's take a look.
One of the ways you understand a society is through its infrastructure, the places where people gather, the places where they go to travel. So with that in mind, we're standing in front of the Kievskaya metro station, and there's a train station next to it. Now, the metro station was built by Joseph Stalin 70 years ago. So we went into it to take a look, and what we found shocked us. There's no graffiti, there's no filth, there are no foul smells, there are no bums or drug addicts or rapists or people waiting to push you onto the train tracks and kill you. No. It's perfectly clean and orderly. And how do you explain that? How does Russia, a country we're told is a gas station with nuclear weapons, have a subway station that normal people use to get to work and home every single day that's nicer than anything in our country?
It's perfectly clean and orderly. How do you explain that? Well, what other reaction is Tucker meant to have? He lives in the United States, a country that spends taxpayers' money on endless wars to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. Of course, they have no money left to give the people nice infrastructure. And that is why the average American will never know, at least through the mainstream media, what it's really like in Moscow or Shanghai or Beijing. They can't know. They'll ask too many questions. It's that simple. Now, I asked you guys how Tucker would react if he came to Shanghai, and you had a lot to say. Carl Wang joked, he'd have a heart attack and be rushed to an amazing hospital by a driverless cab. Bayer said he would, in his disbelief, accuse China of stealing their subway technologies. Louise added, Tucker Carlson is firmly in the anti-China brigade, though he did a good job bringing Putin's side of the story to the Western audience. And now for another point of view, let's chat with today's guest, friend of the show, Eric Zhong, who we haven't seen around here for a little while. Eric, how was your Spring Festival break?
It's great to be back. I mean, my holiday was a long overdue restful one. So I went back to my hometown for a week to see my friends and family. So it was very chill.
Sounds nice. So in running with the theme of today's show, let's talk a little bit about how you got there and got back. How far away is your hometown and how long does the travel take and so on?
Sure. I mean, I went back to my hometown, Nanchang, by the CR bullet train and also known as the high-speed rail. So the distance traveled, I think, was more than 790 kilometers, which is more than 490 miles. So it took me 3 hours and 45 minutes. Well, if you are to take different trains, though, the journey could be as short as 3 hours and 10 minutes and as long as 4 hours and 20 minutes or so. So the good thing, though, is the price does not really change much. So for me, for the regular second class coach, the price for the ticket was 336.5, which is about like 49 US dollars. So I traveled back to Shanghai by plane, and it's almost a double of the price of the train ticket.
Wow, interesting. And the planes, I find, are often late. Now, I was going to talk to you about Tucker Carlson going to Moscow. Now, it took him going there to open the eyes of many Westerners, especially people from the United States, about just how clean and orderly that city is. I think it's quite a shame that Western media doesn't let ordinary citizens see the successes and triumphs of countries that it deems conflict politically with the mighty West. And that includes China. So anyone who watches this show knows that Western media only ever reports China bad, and even then most of it's quite exaggerated. So I was wondering, as a Chinese, do you ever feel a bit annoyed that people around the world aren't really allowed to see the real China?
I mean, of course, but honestly and sort of ironically, I feel I'm a bit used to that already because they've been doing this so much in the past few years. I mean, I'm of course aware of the situation, and I would also caution people against such an unbiased portrait. And China is just such a big country, and stories are much more nuanced or diverse than one would expect. So now that there are many visa policies in favor of having a tour or establishing business ties here in China, people should just come and see things for themselves. That's my number one advice. And another, say, observation or analysis that I personally have is the freedom of speech that many Western media would give them this credits for does not really equal unbiased coverage. I mean, if you think about this from a personal level, even if you have the freedom of speech as an individual, it does not mean that you always have a very balanced portrait of your neighbor, right? You would not say good things and bad things at the same time about them with very good critical perspectives, given, say, your personal interests, given some biases or stereotypes that you may hold. So if we also take a look back at history between, for example, the United States and China, some negative or critical stories, especially in the late 70s and early 80s, were rejected by the editing boards of some Western media when the Western bloc was engaged in fights against other geopolitical powers. So Western media have their own bureaucracies. And as we see it nowadays, they don't choose, likely, to balance between appreciating China genuinely and constructively offering critiques. And many coverages, they criticize for the sake of criticizing, which often then forms an unhealthy echo chamber, which is very regretful.
Yeah, you're right. With the Western media, if it bleeds, it leads. Eric Zhong, it's been great to catch up with you, and that will be it for today, you guys. But as always, I'd love to know what you think, so do let me know down below. Do you think Tucker Carlson would ever come to China? Also, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.